Hey everyone, welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. So glad to see you all in the virtual universe. My name is Becky O'Neill. I am the Executive Director of the Robertson Center at Success Academy, which is our gathering place, a virtual one these days, for believers in the power of public education and all of you makers of magical schools. We know that you all have been making all sorts of magic over these last few very challenging months as educators, as parents turned educators, as nonprofit program leaders. And we're so glad to have the chance to all come together to sort of take a collective breath, see how we're doing, and begin to chart the path ahead. So a couple of quick housekeeping items as folks continue to hop on. First, if you don't follow the Robertson Center already, I hope you will. On Instagram, we are Robertson Center. On Twitter, we are Robertson CTR SA, Robertson CTR SA on Twitter. Both accounts are great places to get the latest on what is coming up, so do find us there. You can also find our podcast, Extraordinary, where we get to talk to educators and leaders we admire. We're on Spotify and we're on Apple Podcasts, so go check us out. So that's the first thing. Second, you are going to see there is a chat box in our virtual gathering space today. So as we go, if you have ideas for future programs that you think we should do, the kinds of people you'd like to see us talk to, definitely chat those in there. We always get our best ideas from all of you. Also, if you have questions, go ahead and chat those in. We're going to do a Q&A at the end of the program, so we'll grab your questions as we go and get as many as we can addressed at the end. So with that, I am delighted to introduce you to Lisa Furst. Lisa is Assistant Vice President of the Center for Policy, Advocacy and Education at Vibrant Emotional Health. She is here to help us, and we're very grateful. So Lisa, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Becky, so much. And thanks to all of you who are tuning in today. You could be anywhere doing anything, and you have chosen on a Tuesday afternoon to take some time to invest in your own emotional well-being. And so I am thrilled to be with you today. And I just want to thank Success Academy and the Robertson Center for inviting me to spend this time with you. So thanks for that. As you can see here, we've got some Zenned out people in the photo, and by the end of this workshop, I'm hoping folks can feel a little closer to Zen and closer to the tools for creating that for themselves outside of the workshop and on a day-to-day basis. So the theme today is about staying in balance. How do we manage stress in times of uncertainty? And, uncertainty is with us under ordinary circumstances, but it certainly is with us now, whatever it is that we're doing and whatever our role is. And so what better time really to talk about how do we keep in balance? How do we maintain our balance? How do we know when we're out of balance? And what can we do in a practical way to get ourselves feeling better when we're struggling with balance? So I wanted us to just take a moment to reflect on this idea of peace. And if you look at that photograph, wouldn't we all love to be there? The water is like glass. There's not a sound. It's gorgeous. But, many of us are not in that situation. What does that mean? Happily, it means that, peace isn't really dependent necessarily on where we are. Peace doesn't mean to be in a place where there is no noise, trouble, or hard work. Peace means to be in the midst of those things and still be calm in your heart. So that seems like a tall order, and it's not something we achieve once and then we never have to worry about getting back to peace. It's something that we achieve and then we need to re-achieve, but that's something that we can do practically. And I'm glad that this is a definition that we can look to because, if peace were dependent on everything external, I think it would be a lot harder for us to get into balance and maintain it, but happily it's not. I wanted to let folks know you're going to be getting resources after this. You'll be getting the slides, and in the slides, as you see, is a link to a resource that is free and downloadable that I wanted to make folks aware of. We have a toolkit, the Staying in Balance Toolkit, and as you'll see in the tagline there, the toolkit is subtitled Healthy Solutions for Managing Workplace Stress. It is focused on folks who are in the workforce. However, there is tons of self-care information, whether that's for our individual selves or in our workplaces, that It's just chock full, and it's even more than we could cover in today's workshop. And so I wanted to let folks know that you'll be getting this link. The Vibrant website holds this toolkit. It is completely free. It is downloadable. You can print it and use it. And so I wanted folks to know you can have that resource and delve into it even more deeply than even the material that we're going to go over today. So what are we going to do in the next 45-ish minutes or so? We're going to identify stressors. What are the sources of stress in our lives? We're going to talk a bit about the body's stress response. Why do we have it? What does it do? And how do we manage it? How do we work with it so that when we're feeling very alarmed or stressed out, how do we ratchet that down? How do we turn off our alarm? We're going to talk a bit about the effects of stress on productivity and morale. How does the human body and brain respond? And we're going to do some skills building and some technique development for stress reduction that we can use every day, every week, every month, and whenever we need it. And part of how we're going to do that is that everyone is going to have an opportunity in the workshop to start working on a self-care action plan that you can take with you and use as a resource long after this workshop has concluded. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty, there is this question: how are we taking care of ourselves? Taking care of you is the first order of business of your day or anyone's day. And so I wanted to ask those folks to just reflect. What is one thing you're doing to take care of yourself today? Maybe you've already done it. Maybe you've already done one thing and you're planning on doing something else to take care of yourself today, or multiple things. If that's the case, kudos to you. That is fantastic. If you feel like, you know what, I've had a really busy day from sun up to now, and I haven't really felt like I've had the opportunity to take care of myself as well as I might have liked, it's okay. Maybe you can think today or in this space about one thing you could do today that would feel nurturing, replenishing, something that would feel like it's taking care of you. It can also be helpful to think about, what would I need to feel more balanced? What support do I need? That might be something as simple as making sure that your morning meal is prepared the night before. It might be an accommodation from your workplace. It might mean a division of chores that's a little bit different at home than is typical. It can be helpful to think about, what is it that might be causing me to feel slightly more out of balance than I would like to be, and what would I need to reverse that or help myself get back into balance? So it's helpful to identify those things. And the other piece here is that whole piece of hope, that without hope, it's hard to feel like we want to take care of ourselves and that we want to do the things that we know we're committed to doing. And so I want to give folks an opportunity in this moment to try to identify in your mind one thing. It doesn't have to be a big thing that gives you hope. One of the things that gives me hope so often is when I do workshops like this, people tune in, they want to come, they actually carve out time to join a conversation like this. I find that incredibly hopeful, because it means that people are hearing the message that taking care of ourselves isn't something selfish. It's something that's critical to your well-being and all of our well-being. So I'm very hopeful about the fact that you're here and that our communities are talking about emotional well-being and mental health. So think about what gives you hope. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about stress and the stress response. And, what is stress? We all use the word. We know how to say, oh, I'm feeling really stressed or I'm stressed out. And it has a pretty simple definition, as you'll see. Stress really is the way that we react emotionally, mentally, and physically to situations that we find difficult, threatening, or unmanageable. So pretty simple definition, but there is a little bit to unpack here. One of the things that always stands out for me when I look at this is that stress is a reaction. We often can't control the externals that may be stressors, the things that cause us to feel stressed. We often don't necessarily have control over those, but we do have influence over our reactions. First of all, by noticing them and then thinking about how we want to handle them. So stress is a reaction, and it affects us in more than one way. It's just not an emotional reaction. It also affects our cognition and our mental processes when we're feeling stressed. We have a physical reaction. So it really is something, stress affects all of the domains of our lives and our presence. And what I also appreciate about the definition is that it is somewhat conditional, meaning here it's saying that stress is something we feel when we're in situations that we find difficult, threatening, or unmanageable. What might feel very difficult, threatening, or unmanageable to me might not feel that way to somebody next to me. And so in some ways, our stress response is idiosyncratic. It does depend on who we are, what our situation is, and what is the current moment doing? What are the stressors that we're dealing with? So there is some flexibility there. And while I think we can agree that the current moment we're in is universally stressful, there may be aspects of it that are more or less stressful for different folks at different times. So there is some variability now. And as you'll see in the illustrations on the slide, there are a couple of reactions that people often have. The person drinking, 10 cups of coffee a day and saying, oh God, I'm so stressed out, nobody come near me. That's a reaction anybody can have. I think we've all had that. It's not terribly sustainable, both for our own mental well-being, but also for that of those around us. And then on the right-hand side, we see this incredible superhero guy with a cape in his office, and he's taking charge, and we often do respond in a positive way to stress to say, okay, the moment is calling for me to take care of business, and I'm going to do that perfectly like a superhero all the time. We're often called upon to be superheroes. We often achieve it, probably not every minute of the day, all the time, and that shouldn't be our expectation, because just like it's not sustainable to be this 10 cups of coffee stress ball all the time, it's also not sustainable to be a superhero all the time. Take a look at this image. Wouldn't it be nice if we all lived or worked here? And I just looking at this and seeing that beautiful blue water and the clear skies and, no crowding, I just look at this and instantly I have a physical reaction where I just let go and relax my muscular tension. And so, when we are able to get away to places like this, it often does feel relaxing. Think about perhaps vacations where you've gone to beautiful places or, looked at images like this. But the truth is, no matter where we are, we bring our reactions with us. So if we lived or worked in a beautiful tropical paradise, but we still had our same work responsibilities, or we were still dealing with, a lockdown or partial lockdown situation, that stress would come with us too. So not only can we not necessarily control the external stressors that we may encounter, we're going to bring our stress response wherever we go. So it's that old expression of, wherever you go, there you are. That means that we can also bring tools and techniques with us so that regardless of where we are, we have an opportunity to check in, see what we're feeling in terms of stress, and then take some active steps to cope with that and to bring ourselves better into balance. The environment might help us to do that, but not necessarily. So just to point that out, that regardless of where we are, we have the potential to bring stress, but also to manage it. If we think about, well, what are the things that stress people out? What are those common stressors? What you see here is an illustration of a set of domains, if you will. We've got this idea of sources of stress at the center, and whether we're thinking personally or work or any other place, I think it's fair to say that these domains exist in both personal and professional existences. So demands are a source of stress. Those might be work deadlines or other kinds of work-related commitments and obligations. Those may be personal and social demands, many of which we take on with pleasure a lot of the time, but that still means those are things that we need to fulfill. So demands can be sources of stress. Control. What do we have control over? What don't we have control over? Generally speaking, when people feel a sense of agency and more control rather than less, they tend to have less stress, or they feel less stressed. We're in a moment where none of us really have control over the public health situation or what's going on environmentally. What we do have control over to some extent is what we're doing. Are we using masks? Are we washing hands? Are we practicing self-care? Those are the pieces that we may have control over, even in moments that feel fairly uncertain and fairly out of our own control. Support. And obviously support is a lovely word. And when people have more support, it tends to reduce stress, but it's got to be the right support at the right time. And certainly a lack of support, whether that is, again, in the work situation or in one's personal life, that lack could be quite stressful. Relationships. These are often really helpful to keep us in balance, but relationships, even if they're good ones, can also be a source of stress. We may have wonderful relationships with our colleagues, with our bosses, with the folks that we are mentoring, but those relationships can also be fraught with stress, especially when you're working in a high stress situation, as we all are now. Relationships at home or in families can be both a source of joy and comfort, as well as a stressor if there is conflict or limited resources that everyone needs to share, whether that's space or other resources. So that can be a source of stress. Role. What is our role? Becky was pointing out in her introduction earlier, those of you who work as educators, you know what your role ordinarily entails. You're all in a new situation where you are carrying out your role in a very different way. And I can only imagine the stress associated with that. Those of you who are educators and working from home, you may also be parents doing the same. For those of you that are not educators but are parents, as Becky was saying, you are suddenly becoming a partner to the educators in your lives in a way that you hadn't envisioned or prepared for. So, our roles are shifting, and that can be connected to change, which is the next domain. But, role and tension within role can be a source of stress, and certainly change, even changes that we seek that are good. You get that new job, you get your first teaching gig, or you get a promotion at work, or, something positive happens in your family that's a change. Those are things we tend to want. Even those can bring stress because it brings newness and calls upon us to bring out new skills. So all of these things can be sources of stress, some more, some less at any given time, but these tend to be the buckets where people identify, okay, it's these things that are stressing me out. And how do we know when we're stressed out, and why does that even happen? So we are all inborn to have the stress response. This is something that human beings have evolved to have over millennia, and even more than millennia. Our ancestors from long ago, before civilization, we are biologically born with the stress response, and that is extremely important. The stress response is critical, and no one should come away from this workshop or any other with the notion that the goal of staying in balance is to somehow get rid of or eliminate our stress response. Not only is that literally physically impossible, it is not at all desirable. The stress response exists for a reason, and that reason was to, and is, to get ourselves out of those dangerous, threatening, or unmanageable situations. And as you see on the slide, there's a picture of a growling grizzly bear. So imagine that you were taking a nice relaxing walk in the woods somewhere, and you're just moseying along, and suddenly you see a bear, and this bear is growling at you and baring its teeth. You're not going to sit around thinking a whole lot about that situation. You are going to have an automatic, biologically driven response to that threat and danger. And that response is going to happen in seconds. It is not going to involve any significant cognitive process whatsoever. You're going to have a stress response, and that response is there to save your life. So we've all heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response. That's really what we're talking about. So that is our brain and body's way of sounding the alarm. Hey, there's danger. Hey, we need to do something about it to preserve our safety. And as you can see on the right-hand part of the slide, there's a little diagram of a person. And really what this is showing is how the stress response really affects the whole body. So it originates in our brain, but not in the, prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of our brain. This is something much more primitive and much more inborn. So the organs in our brain react to the perception of danger and start to cue the body to release stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, that really get our bodies responding. And so our senses heighten. We start to have a change in our cardiovascular system. Our heart will start to beat more quickly so that blood can circulate more quickly, so that we have the oxygen delivered to our muscles. We have the right kinds of nutrients delivered to our muscles. Our breathing will change. We'll breathe more quickly. The goal is to take in more oxygen and have more fuel to burn so that we can fight or fly or find a place and hide so we can freeze. Certain things also slow down. Digestion isn't as important here. It doesn't matter if our body is quickly breaking down vitamins and minerals and fats and protein. That process slows down because that's not as important as saving our lives. Often we'll feel muscle tightness or tension. This is again so we can spring into action. So if we didn't have the biologically inborn capacity to respond to threat in this way, our ancestors wouldn't have made it and we wouldn't be here. In modern times, we're less concerned with bears, perhaps, or those kinds of dangers, and more things like, maybe you're crossing the street and a car is speeding toward you. The exact same response happens here, where you run out of the way or you retreat to the other part of the sidewalk to escape the car. When we are confronted with an acute stress, like a speeding car or, a bear in the woods, once that threat is gone, once the car has passed or we've escaped it, once the bear has run away or we've run away and we're no longer in danger, that stress response goes right down. So we can have a very acute reaction that then goes right down as soon as the threat evolves. And there typically isn't any lingering effect from that. That's what our body is designed to do. Rear up really quickly when we need it to, and then ratchet back down so that we can get back to balance. In the modern world, we often experience not so much life-threatening things on a day-to-day basis, but we have a lot of different stressors in the modern world that may be lower level in terms of threat, but are much more frequent and much more constant than perhaps our ancestors had. And so what can happen in the modern world is that our alarm is sounding much more frequently over a longer period of time at a lower level than if we had an acute stress like confronting a grizzly bear that then we had to get away from or fight. So, the stress response often in the modern world is active and perhaps even overactive for us, and we may not even be aware of it. So the first step in managing whatever our stress response is to identify, well, how does stress affect us uniquely? What does that actually look like? And I'm just going to quickly show a slide. You will get a link to this video. Videos don't play easily in this format. So when you get the slides, you'll have a link to a YouTube video that is pretty engaging and not very long, but in a very practical and somewhat amusing way can really help you understand the stress response even further and why we have it and how it works. And this video contains some really great practical tips on what we can do to manage our stress more fully on a day-to-day basis in the modern world. So you will get access to that video. So one analogy we can think of in the modern world when we think about what is it that we do when we're responding to overwhelming stress is, we might think of ourselves as driving a car. You might have your foot on the gas. You might feel very angry, agitated, keyed up, very emotional, very having a difficult time sitting still. So it's like you're in the go, go, go mood in your response to stress. Other people might have a different kind of reaction where it feels like they're in a car, but they're braking. They're putting their foot on the brake, and they might have, instead of being agitated and keyed up, they might feel withdrawn. They might feel lower energy, depressed. They might feel kind of shut down and spaced out. You can often tell when someone has their foot on the gas because they appear to be agitated. Someone who has their foot on the brake seems to be more withdrawn. But people are complex and things are rarely black or white. So sometimes we can have both reactions at once or, sort of putting the gas and the brake on at the same time. And that's a pretty tense kind of freezing response where it feels like we're really paralyzed to manage anything. We can't really act easily. So it appears that our foot is on the brake, but internally we actually feel quite keyed up and agitated. So it's as if we have our foot on the gas and foot on the brake at the same time. It doesn't matter which of these you tend toward. It doesn't mean anything in particular about you. It's just helpful to know, you may be aware, oh, I'm definitely that agitated foot on the gas person, or you know what? I'm a little more withdrawn, or depending on the situation, I can have kind of a mixed reaction. So it's just helpful to know, what tends to be your pattern, because again, that's the key toward supporting yourself and managing it. So one thing that I like to remind myself and encourage others to do is literally just to breathe. And I love this quote, a great time to relax is when you do not have time for it. And that's the irony of it. Often when we feel like we are most in need of a break is when it feels like it's impossible. the thing that we're doing anyway, that we have to do to live, is to breathe. And that's something we fortunately don't have to think about. Our bodies do it for us. That being said, we can make an effort to actively think about our breathing and consciously control it. And what you'll see on this slide, you'll see another link to a YouTube video that, again, you'll be able to have access to after the workshop. If you click on this link, what you will see is an icon of a geometric figure expanding and contracting in time. And you can breathe in and out in time to this video, and it will have an instantly calming effect. If you don't want to watch a video to breathe, that's okay. But I would encourage folks, when you're feeling really tense and stressed out, to just stop for a moment and consciously take a deep breath. And we can even do it right now. I would encourage folks, if you're interested in joining me, to take a deep breath through your nose and hold it for a second. So breathe in, hold, breathe out through your mouth. And if you can breathe out through your mouth a little bit longer than you breathed in, that actually tends to have a calming effect on the nervous system. So again, I'm going to ask us to breathe for those of you that want to join in. We're going to breathe in through our nose as deeply as you can. Hold it for a moment. Let it out through your mouth. And if you can take a few moments to do that whenever you're aware of feeling tense or stress, it will actually start to calm things down in your body. So breathing is a great way to start to lower that stress response, even if you think you don't have time for it. So we're in a current moment where we're in a public health emergency. We're in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic, and that is technically a disaster. And I want to let folks know that if you are feeling distressed, if you are feeling out of balance, if you find yourself having reactions, the first thing I want folks to know, that makes complete sense. That is completely expected. That is completely normal or typical for any human being faced with a disaster situation of whatever type. So some of the reactions that we may be having, some of them are listed on the slide. So things like trouble eating and sleeping, either doing too much, not doing enough. We may feel emotions that are difficult to feel, like sadness or anger, frustration, irritation. We may find ourselves getting more emotional. We may find ourselves hypervigilant, on edge, feeling very tense and easily startled. We may feel a lack of emotion. We may feel like, well, gosh, I know I'm supposed to be really distressed. Everyone is really stressed out and anxious and full of grief in the current moment, but gosh, I don't feel like I feel anything. That's a reaction, and it's not uncommon. We may feel like we're having difficulty at work or at school if we're students, that it's hard to be at our best. Makes complete sense. We may have trouble listening, concentrating. We may find ourselves reading the same bit of information over and over again and not absorbing it. And that may lead to us having some difficulty fulfilling our expected responsibilities, whether that's at work, at home, in our other obligations. That is completely expected, like I said. So the first thing I would want folks to do is to not pathologize your own response. This is what it means to be human in the wake of a disaster. If you're experiencing these things, it makes sense. But again, if we are experiencing these things, all the more reason to take that time to invest in our own well-being and self-care. So in this slide here, this really breaks down some of the reactions that we talked about earlier or alluded to. In the definition of stress, we talked about all those different domains, that it's a physical, emotional, and mental reaction. There's also behavior that goes along with that. So some of the signs and symptoms of stress that you see here probably will ring familiar to you, some of which we've already touched on, the emotional signs, feeling easily angered or triggered, feeling unhappy, feeling blue or sad. Feelings of loneliness and isolation can certainly happen under any stressful situation, but in a situation where we are being asked to physically distance, that may be heightened. Agitation, difficulty relaxing, at times feeling hopeless, these are all emotional signs of stress. The cognitive or the mental, in terms of our thought processes, feeling worry or anxiety on a regular basis, seeing the glass as half empty or not seeing a glass at all, so focusing on negative aspects of things, difficulty concentrating, not making the best decisions, having difficulty remembering, or just having a difficult time thinking things through. Very typical reactions to stress. Physically, we might have aches and pains. It's not uncommon for people to talk about frequent headaches or, digestive challenges, stomach pain. People may feel tightness in their chest. They may feel their heart beating more rapidly. It is true that when we're under prolonged stressful situations, our immune system doesn't work as well. And so we may get, things like colds more frequently, or feel unwell more frequently. We don't talk about this much, but in terms of our intimate lives, it's hard to want to feel romantic or intimate with our partners if we're feeling a lot of stress. So it takes a toll relationally there too. Fatigue, a big one. And then in terms of all of this, we tend to behave a little bit differently when we're feeling stressed. So we talked about eating more or less. We may find ourselves avoiding things that feel stressful, procrastinating or putting off responsibilities. We may find ourselves isolating even more than we're currently being asked to do. We may feel restless. Some of us may feel that in order to cope, it may help us to drink more than we typically do. Maybe we're using substances or increasing our use of substances or smoking more than usual. And that way of coping, though very common, can also take a toll on us. So just some things to touch base on. And so knowing which of these we tend to experience, maybe you're someone that gets a lot of headaches and stomach pain, and you feel like you have trouble remembering and concentrating, but you don't necessarily procrastinate, or, there's some combination that you may say, well, gosh, this tends to be my stress response. Really key to recognizing that, because again, recognizing your own unique signs and symptoms of stress response, that's your window into knowing, okay, let me take some time out here. Let me think about what am I doing to take care of myself and how can I boost that a bit so that I can feel more in balance. So these are some questions that we can ask ourselves to think about, how are we managing our stress? And there's no judgment. Whatever your answers are for any of these questions, it is simply information. It doesn't have meaning beyond that. But asking, when I feel agitated, do I know how to calm myself? If the answer is yes, that's a helpful thing. You've got some tools in your toolbox. If the answer is no, that's an opportunity. Maybe I can get some more tools in my toolbox. Can I easily let go of my anger? Can I turn to others to help me calm down and feel better? When I finish work for the day, do I feel relaxed? Am I often distracted or moody? When my energy is low, do I know how to boost it? So some of the answers to these may be yes, some of them may be no. Again, this is just a window into understanding more about our stress response and maybe what supports we need and what kinds of things we might start to think about putting into practice to help ourselves manage any stress response that we are having. This brings us to the fun part. So there is a self-care assessment that folks got emailed. And I'm going to also show it. This is a really great questionnaire that is quick to do, that you can do on your own time. You can do it more than once. And I'm going to ask people, we're going to take a few minutes to do it today. I also want to let you know that the assessment that you got emailed to you is available in that Staying in Balance toolkit that you're going to get a link to. So if you can't check your email or don't have your email, that is okay. You can access it that way. I'm also going to pull it up on my screen so you can take a look at what I'm talking about. Oh, whoops, I meant to make that bigger. So this is the self-care assessment, and folks, as I mentioned, should have gotten this email to them. And it really is breaking things up into domains. So as you'll see here, there's the physical self-care domain, there's psychological self-care, emotional self-care, spiritual self-care. And what the questionnaire is really asking you to do is to take a moment to reflect on each of the items that are here and rate yourself. If you do think with these items frequently, you're a 1. If it's occasional, you would put a 2, sometimes a 3, rarely a 4. And if you never participate in that activity, it's a 5. So I'm going to give folks maybe about 5 minutes. You may not get a chance to do all of this, but you can at least perhaps review it, start to answer some of the questions for yourself. And we'll talk about how we can use this. So I'm going to give us just a few minutes, and I'm going to pause. And if folks have any questions about the self-care assessment as you're looking at it or doing it, feel free to put that in the chat box, and folks can voice that out loud for me, and I'm happy to address them. But just take a few moments to take a look. About 2 more minutes, and you'll probably need more time than that to really do all of it, but it'll get your feet in the door, so to speak. Another minute. Okay, so probably you didn't have an opportunity to get through the entire assessment. That is okay. It's a resource you can continue to use, and you can get it again if you download the toolkit. But you'll at least have a sense of what the self-care assessment is asking you about, and maybe you did have in those few moments an opportunity to do a little bit of reflection or just start that reflection on activities that relate to self-care and what you're participating in terms of self-care. When you complete your self-care assessment, it'll be useful to take a look and see, what did you notice? Are there areas that are in need of some attention? And can you start to think about, what might I do to shift this area immediately? So, if you listed a 5 that you never do a particular activity, but you have no interest in doing that activity, that's totally okay. You don't need to go back and try to do that. But, if there was something on there that you noticed, such as, just picking a random example, physical movement, if that is something that you are noticing you're getting, a 3, 4, or 5 on, that may be an area that you're potentially interested in paying attention to and seeing if you can shift how often you move physically, for example, and start to think about it. And the self-care assessment, the action plan piece of it that you'll see later in the document, you'll have an opportunity to note, what are some self-care activities that you could commit to doing every day, that you could commit to doing every week, perhaps monthly, and then whenever you need it. So in the whenever you need it category, certainly that deep breathing kind of exercise that we did a moment ago, that's a whenever you need it kind of thing. So the self-care assessment, again, it's not a tool for judgment. It's really a window into our own self-care and opportunities we might take to engage more frequently in self-care. And you can do the assessment as many times as you want. You could use it as a way of checking in on yourself. It's not a one-shot or a one-time only tool, and it can be quite practical. So I do encourage folks, if you didn't finish it, to go back, if you finished it, to take a look and see what are some things you might be interested in engaging in or re-engaging in for your own self-care and balance. And along with that, I do want to put in a plug here that self-care is not selfish or self-indulgent. We cannot nurture ourselves from a dry well. We need to take care of our own needs first. Then we can give from our surplus, our abundance. And simple concept that everyone understands, but unless we consciously make an effort to put it into practice, it is very easy to let go of our self-care. And that doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve our students or our family members or friends. It doesn't allow us to be who we want to be. And self-care is a big part of that. So here is a list of some potentially helpful things to do to manage stress. Certainly reaching out for support is a big piece of it. Limiting media intake, really critical in a time like this. Yes, we need to know what's going on. We don't need to know what's going on every second of every moment, most likely. Getting a good diet, getting as much sleep as you can, moving, setting aside time to relax, doing something fun and joyful, making your environment as manageable as you can. For those of you working in smaller spaces, that may be a little more challenging, but whatever it is that you can do there. Saying no when you need to say no and when something doesn't feel really tenable is important. Checking in on your stress level. What are those signs and symptoms? What is your stress response telling you? And then spending time with family and friends, not talking about work or even what's going on in the world if that is too stressful, but creating that social connectedness even as we physically distance is critical. Kermit says stretch. So I never say no to a Muppet when a Muppet tells me what to do. So I would just encourage folks wherever you're sitting to just take a moment and stretch out. Put your hands up toward the ceiling, bend from side to side, maybe do some shoulder rolls, move your head from side to side. That's another thing you can do quickly whenever you need it to relax some muscle tension and lower your stress response. So investing in our emotional health through supporting self-care is important. It builds our resilience, which is what enables us to bounce back from the kinds of adversity that we're dealing with now. And resilience is what allows us to maintain ourselves as flexible, focused, able to focus on positive things even when we're in a difficult situation. For those of us that are working as educators or working in any other capacity, when we are investing in our emotional and mental health and we're building our pool of resilience, it increases our productivity. It allows us to still find joy and pleasure in the work that we've chosen to do. It enhances our relationships and reconnects us to our own sense of purpose. So it is very important for us to take care of ourselves emotionally. This is just a slide with some other relaxation technique ideas. And again, in the toolkit, if you choose to download that, you'll get a whole host more. And I did want to let folks know you will, when you get the slides, be getting some resources. There are some reading materials about stress management specifically during the current situation in terms of our public health situation. And there's a list of websites that you can go to that are great resources for mindfulness practices, meditation practices. You know, the more we study these things, the more we find that they really do help people to manage stress and bring themselves back into balance, particularly if we don't just do it once in a while, but actually make it part of our routine practice of self-care. So I wanted to give those resources to folks as well. And I wanted to let folks know of a resource that some of you may have already heard of called NYC Well, and this is New York City's free and confidential 24/7 service for anyone that is struggling with emotional distress, you know, mental health issues like anxiety or depression, if you or someone you know is using drugs or alcohol to cope. This is a great resource. So I would encourage folks to reach out if you feel like you need extra support or someone you care about needs extra support. You can call 188 NYC Well. You can text Well to 65173, or you can even chat. If you go to the NYC website, you can chat with a counselor. Again, it's free, it's confidential. People are there picking up the calls, texts, and chats 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So don't wait until you're feeling extra distressed, if you feel like you need to talk to someone, don't hesitate to reach out. I want to thank you for joining today's workshop. I know we're going to have time for Q&A, but I wanted to close out with this quote from the incredible Audre Lorde. I have come to believe that caring for myself is not self-indulgent. Caring for myself is an act of survival. So I want to just encourage you again, whenever you think, oh, self-care is nice, but I don't have time, it's really something that your investment in will pay a lot of dividends in going forward. So I do encourage people to do whatever they can to preserve your emotional well-being, bring yourself back into balance, and know that that is a necessary priority for you. So thank you all so much. I'm happy to open it up to any questions or thoughts anybody has, any comments.
Yeah, Lisa, this is Becky, so I can chime in with some of the questions that have been popping up throughout the session, which was incredibly helpful. So thank you. First question, just on those resources you were just describing, are those available in any other languages? And you have to be someone who lives in New York City to use them?
So in terms of, I just put my slides back to, the meditation and mindfulness practices resources. As far as I know, there aren't multiple languages there. These are free websites. However, if you go to these other links for the reading materials, many of these are available in Spanish, for instance. But I do think there's not enough literature available in many other languages. And I think that's a weakness of our public health system. It's a great question. It's something we need more of. With regard to being in New York City or not, certainly anything that is web-based, you can be anywhere. And with regard to NYC Well, it's a great question. So that is a service that is for the 5 boroughs of New York City. However, and I didn't put this on the slide, there is another service, and that's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And that number is 1-800-273-TALK, the word talk, T-A-L-K, 1-800-273-TALK. That's a national number. So you can call that anytime, and it's a very similar thing where if you're anywhere in the country and you call 1-800-273-TALK, you'll be connected to a counseling center wherever is the nearest one to you. So if you were in New York City and you called 1-800-273-TALK, you would get routed to the NYC Well service because that's what's here in New York City. But if you were in Westchester County in New York, or you were in California or any other state, you would get connected to a service that is more local to you. So that's the number I would use there.
Great. And then Lisa, can you speak a little bit to how we see sort of signs of stress in kids? So one person had a question specifically about their child is sighing a lot, and they're wondering if that's normal or sort of what other, signs folks should be looking for.
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, certainly children and teenagers may manifest stress differently than adults do. I mean, for one thing, they may be less likely to talk about it in the way that an adult does. Certainly for children, we would want to look at, are they able to engage in play? Are they participating in creative activities? Are their drawings, very troubled looking or about troubled subjects? Is their play, repetitively, playing out troubling subjects like things around illness or dying or things that seem really stressful? That may be one way of looking into it. Certainly if they have changes in their own eating or sleeping, their socializing habits, behaviors, children who exhibit regressive behaviors may be responding to stress, if they're acting younger than they normally would. Sighing is interesting. It could be that if that is not a typical behavior for that child, it may be that they're responding to something, and it may be that teaching that young person some deep breathing, hey, when you're feeling sad or stressed, here's something we can do, can feel really empowering. I mean, a sigh is essentially that. It's an attempt to relieve stress. So it might be worth asking that child, what are you feeling in your body when you're sighing? What is that like? And then giving them some tools. Kids can learn things like deep breathing or guided imagery. And there are, if you Google it, there are videos for kids on, things like yoga and meditation that are specifically geared toward children. So that may be something to introduce children to. So yeah, it can look different, certainly for teenagers. They may, they're already oriented toward their peer group. They may become even more so. They may be grumpier or moodier. They may act out a little bit more. These may be reactions to stress. And if we're not thinking about that, we may think, oh, this kid is just being really annoying and they're getting on my nerves and this is typical teenage angst. It may be more than that. So engaging a teenager in conversation and also introducing them to some of these resources can be incredibly helpful.
Great. And we had a great question from Katie. She said, I've been struggling with starting every day fresh since each day seems the same right now. Any suggestions to sort of get over that sinking feeling when my brain remembers what's going on in the world?
Yeah. That's such a good question. For many of us, I think we're in that situation. We wake up and go to sleep in the same place. We may not be leaving where, the four walls of where we are. To the extent that it is safe for anyone to get outside, I would encourage folks to do that while maintaining social distance or physical distancing, changing literally what you're looking at, changing the scene. If you're used to, for those of you that maybe you wake up and do some stretching, or if you do some movement, even doing it in a different room or a different part of the room, making small changes, maybe varying when you wake up. So if it's possible, can you wake up 20 minutes earlier and have a tea or a coffee or do some meditation, something that can break up and create some transition, making those appointments with friends and family to have some social time, even if it's just on the phone or via a computer using Zoom or something equivalent, creating differences in an active way. But that's a common thing that I think people are dealing with. So it does require putting in something that is novel, even when it doesn't feel completely novel because you're living and working in the same space most likely, but creating some small changes, changing your wake up time, changing when you do things, adding movement if there isn't any, trying to get outside every day if you can. Those kinds of things can help.
Great. And another great question from Jessica. I imagine this is a question that a number of folks might have. How can I deal with the stress I get from helping my daughter with her schoolwork every day? She's 5, and I feel like if I'm not with her, she's not doing any work. I have twin 1-year-old, and I'm also working and studying from home.
That is such a tough situation, and my guess is that you are doing an incredible job that you may not even be recognizing. So just kudos to you for all that you're doing for your family and for your employer. I think one thing we can do is perhaps let go of whatever our ideal expectations are. It may be that your 5-year-old doesn't do everything on the same schedule or accomplish every task that you would ideally want to have happen. This is a tough thing. It's not really possible to get everything done perfectly in the way that we would want in the current situation. So to the extent that you can find places of latitude, where can something be adjusted? Where can something be let go? What are some choices? And you may have to make choices. Is it going to be time working on schoolwork, or is it going to be time working on my own work, or is it going to be time just taking time out for all of that? There's not a perfect answer, but the first thing I would say is to not be hard on yourself if you're feeling like, wow, I'm not doing a good job here. You are doing a good job. You're doing a great job. And this is a really tough situation. So I think making those decisions about what you want to keep trying, what you want to let go of, and then to the extent that you can, carving out even little moments to take 5 really deep cleansing breaths, to find 15 minutes where you can listen to the YouTube meditation that you like. Carving out any time, whether that's on a daily basis or specifically on the weekends where you read that book that you wanted to get into. Creating those spaces of calm and enjoyment, even if they have to be done in little chunks at a time, can help to reduce that stress. But my heart goes out to you and to all of the parents who are parenting and working on education all from home. It's a huge job that you're doing, and you're doing great at it.
Great. And then you mentioned that people may experience some physical changes based on stress. Can you just speak a little more to that? What are the types of changes that sometimes folks experience?
Yeah, I think typically, eating and sleeping, which I mentioned, are two of the really biggest ones. And I think sleep is a big area where people may find, maybe they go to sleep, but they can't stay asleep, or they have insomnia, or they wake up much earlier than they want to. Some people have the opposite reaction where they may find themselves feeling very sleepy all the time and wanting to sleep more. That's just the body's response to stress. So in either case, some of the answer is about conscious relaxation, that, the body's chemicals are going and going and going when we're feeling stress. And the only way to kind of lower that response is to actively engage in practices that are known to be relaxing or calming, like breathing, like gentle movement, like guided visualization, other kinds of mindfulness practices that can actually interrupt that physiological reaction, and sleep can improve, for example. People may find themselves experiencing a lot of muscle tension. Their shoulders are up by their ears and they don't even realize it. A lot of tension, headaches. Some folks may find they're going to the bathroom a lot. They're having GI issues, or they're not going to the bathroom as much as they might, and having stomach pain. So these are signs. Drinking a lot of fluids, eating as well as you can, movement, these are all things that can help all aspects of our physical presence. So yeah, movement is good for our cardiovascular system and all of that, but it also relaxes our muscles. It lowers our level of stress hormones. And so, our sleep gets better. So doing any of these kinds of physical interventions can help our entire physical self.
Great. And can you share that national hotline number one more time that you mentioned?
Sure. It is 1-800-273, and then the word TALK, TALK, 1-800-273-TALK. And TALK is, if you had it in numbers, it would be 8255. So 1-800-273-8255.
Great. And I think we have time for one last question here. Nicole had a question about when you're starting a conversation with a student or your child about maybe a concern that you have for them, something you've noticed. Do you have any suggestions for how to sort of start those conversations?
You definitely want to do it, pick a time that's calm, where you're not providing other kinds of instruction or, reprimanding about something. And then you might want to just, again, depending on the age of the child or the young person, start to engage them about how they're feeling. What are they noticing? How are they feeling, inside in their heart? How are they feeling physically? What are they noticing in their bodies? And then if you have noticed a particular thing, someone mentioned sighing earlier. If you've noticed a behavior, you can gently speak to that and say, I've noticed lately that, this thing is happening. I wonder how you're, feeling when you're doing that. And you can start to just engage around it. The point here would be to, not make it a pathological thing. It's a behavior that is communication, whatever it is. And it may be, depending on the age of the child, it may be a way that a child is showing how they're feeling or experiencing something rather than telling. So then noticing the behavior and then inquiring, when you're doing that, how are you feeling in your body, or what are you thinking about? And what are those thoughts making you feel? And then talking about, how do we make ourselves feel better when we're feeling sad or when we're feeling worried? That might be a way. So it's an opportunity not only to identify what's happening, but potentially an opportunity to impart a coping strategy that in an age-appropriate way.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. This was tremendously helpful, and you're just getting lots of love in the chat here for how much folks have appreciated this conversation. So everyone, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all that you are doing. We're going to follow up with some resources, lots of the things that Lisa mentioned, along with a survey on the session, so you can tell us what you thought, tell us what you think we should do in the future. But other than that, know that we are just cheering you on and so proud and impressed by all of you. And we can't wait to see you all again in the very near future.
Thank you.